Welcome, aspirants, to Unlock UPSC. Today, we are diving deep into a really crucial editorial about India's recent and, frankly, spectacular economic performance. Now, if you're preparing for the UPSC, BPSC, or any other civil services exam, this analysis is something you absolutely need to understand. We're going to be hitting on some core concepts that are super relevant for your General Studies Paper 3.
But hey, before we get into the main story, let's get our brains warmed up. Here's a question from a previous year's exam. It tests a fundamental concept that is absolutely central to everything we're going to talk about today. So take a good look, think it through, and lock in your answer. We'll check back in just a moment.
All right, did you get it? The correct answer is A, meaning only the first statement is correct. Now, why is the second one wrong? Because when we adjust for inflation, we're talking about real gross domestic product, not nominal. And trust me, this isn't just a technicality. This distinction is the critical lens we need to really understand the story behind the economic numbers we're about to explore, so keep that in mind.
So here's our game plan for today. We'll start with the American challenge and see how India fought back with data. Then we'll decode those growth numbers, sector by sector. We'll find out what's really driving the economy and tackle a really fascinating paradox between growth and welfare. And finally, we'll wrap it all up with a sharp focus on what you need for your mains exam answers. Okay, let's dive right in. To really get a sense of how big this achievement was for the Indian economy, we need to set the scene. You see, this growth didn't happen in a bubble. The economy was facing some serious external pressure, particularly from the United States, and this was way more than just a simple trade dispute. It was a major test of our economic foundations. The whole American strategy was based on, well, a massive miscalculation. The U.S. administration at the time wasn't just skeptical. They openly called the Indian economy dead. Can you imagine? They were convinced that all our claims of growth were completely hollow, just empty words. And this one deeply flawed belief led them to make their next big move. So, operating under this assumption that our economy was fragile, they decided to act aggressively. In August, the United States hit India with a massive 50% tariff. The goal was pretty simple: to squeeze an economy they thought was already on the brink of collapse. This was a direct, high-stakes challenge to see if India's economy would buckle.
So how did India respond to this? Not with angry speeches or diplomatic drama. No, the response was something far more powerful, something undeniable. India responded with cold, hard economic data. The numbers themselves became the ultimate rebuttal, completely demolishing that dead economy narrative piece by piece.
The very first number that shut down the critics was this: a stunning 8.2% growth rate in our gross domestic product for the second quarter. To put that in perspective, this wasn't just a good number. It absolutely blew past the growth rates of major developed economies like Japan and Germany. This wasn't a sign of a weak recovery. This was a sign of powerful forward momentum.
And that powerful growth wasn't just some abstract percentage. It had a massive real-world impact. It was the force that pushed the Indian economy past a huge psychological and economic milestone, crossing the $4 trillion United States dollar mark for the very first time. This cemented India's position as a true global economic powerhouse.
Now, you might be wondering if that 8.2% was just a fluke. Not at all. It was part of a consistent trend. It built on the strong 8.4% growth from the previous fiscal year. In fact, our performance has been so robust that the chief economic advisor is now projecting this year's total growth to be around 7.5%, way higher than the earlier, more cautious forecasts. This all points to sustained economic dynamism.
All right, so those headline figures are impressive. But for a mains answer, just stating the big number isn't enough. The real insight, the kind that gets you those high scores, comes from digging deeper. So let's break these figures down and see where this incredible growth actually came from. And remember our question at the start? This is where that difference between real and nominal gross domestic product becomes so clear. In this quarter, the real GDP stood at 48.63 lakh crore rupees. But the nominal GDP, which includes inflation, was way up at 85.25 lakh crore rupees. You can see how both numbers are needed to really understand the full economic story. And for your exams, having a precise definition is absolutely non-negotiable. So here's the one you need to remember for nominal gross domestic product. It's the total market value of all final goods and services produced within a country's borders during a specific period, measured at current market prices, and This is the key, without adjusting for inflation. This table is where we see the real strength of the economy. The main takeaway? The growth wasn't just in one or two places. It was incredibly broad-based. Manufacturing and services were the absolute powerhouses, growing at an amazing 9.1 and 9.2%. The financial and real estate sector did even better, expanding by over 10%. Construction and trade also saw healthy growth. And crucially, even our agricultural sector grew at a solid 3.5%. This is the picture of a healthy, well-rounded economic engine. So this leads us to the next big question. What was fueling this powerful engine? How did India stay so resilient, especially with those huge tariffs looming? Let's take a look at the key drivers behind this incredible momentum. Well, the single biggest driver of our economy is, simply put, us. Domestic demand, private consumption, which is just a fancy way of saying what all of us households spend, makes up a massive 55 to 57% of our entire gross domestic product. When that part of the economy is strong, it creates a powerful internal engine that makes us much less vulnerable to shocks from the outside world.
You see, this resilience was no accident. It was built on a few strong pillars. First, as we just saw, that incredibly strong domestic demand. Second, a really clever move by Indian companies who actually ramped up production and exports before the tariffs hit. Third, inflation stayed relatively low, which kept prices stable and helped people's purchasing power. And finally, you had the huge boost from festive season spending, which always gets the market buzzing. All these things created a powerful buffer.
But as we know, impressive growth numbers don't tell the whole story. For a civil services aspirant, the ability to look past the headlines and analyze a situation critically is what really sets you apart. And that brings us to a crucial paradox, a complex issue that's perfect for a deep analysis in an essay or even your interview. Here it is, the fundamental question that really challenges the simple story of inclusive growth. It's a question every policymaker and every aspirant has to think about. If the Indian economy is so strong, with record growth and a booming market, why does the government still need to provide free food grains to over 81 crore people? This slide just perfectly captures that paradox. On one side, you have a triumphant economy. On the other, one of the largest welfare programs in the world. So what does this tell us? It points to a deep structural challenge. It suggests that our growth might be K-shaped, where the top is rising very quickly, but the benefits aren't trickling down enough to the bottom. Maybe it's due to income inequality, or maybe it's a pattern of jobless growth, where the fastest growing sectors don't create enough jobs for everyone. It shows that while we're creating national wealth, we're still grappling with how to distribute it equitably. All right, let's wrap this up by distilling everything we've discussed into concrete, actionable points for your mains answers. Remember, it's using the right data and offering a balanced, critical view that will really make your answer shine. Here are the absolute must-know takeaways for your notes. First, the key numbers, that 8.2% growth rate and the $4 trillion milestone. Second, use the sectoral data, mention manufacturing at 9.1% and services at 9.2% to show the growth was broad-based. Third, explain our resilience by citing private consumption's huge 55 to 57% share of the GDP. And finally, the most critical part for a top-scoring answer, you must analyze the paradox of high growth existing alongside the 81 core beneficiaries of food schemes. And to help you put this all into practice, here is a main-style question based on our discussion. I really encourage you to take some time and outline a full answer. Start with an introduction, build a body using the data and concepts we've covered, and write a solid, forward-looking conclusion. This is exactly the kind of critical analysis the examiners are looking for. कल फिर मिलते हैं एक महत्वपूर्ण संपादकीय के साथ। इसके लिए YouTube चैनल अनलॉक UPSC को सब्सक्राइब कर लीजिए। धन्यवाद।